Hello, welcome. Can I have your attention here, please? Hi. Wow, what a turnout. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Molly Bell. I'm the political director for Montana Conservation Voters. And for those of you that can't make it in here because there's no room, I don't know if you can hear me, we are going to be recording this and putting it on YouTube as well. So the purpose of this event tonight is to talk about data centers. And with the rise of artificial intelligence, tech companies are quickly working to build data centers across the country, including in Montana. In the spirit of the tech mantra, move fast and break things, data centers are proliferating across the country, but we want to take some time tonight to pause and talk about the potential costs to the environment, Montana communities, and to electricity ratepayers. The purpose of this informational, nonpartisan event is to explore recent changing energy policy at the state and federal level and updates on NorthWestern Energy's proposal and updates on NorthWestern Energy proposals that could raise your electricity bills. We will dive deeper into data center development in Montana, especially in Yellowstone County. And before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. We're going to be having a Q&A after the event, so there are going to be note cards going around. So please write your questions on the note cards. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. But if we don't get to your question, please sign up with the groups here that are represented tonight, and we can follow up with an email or a phone call to answer your question. There's also a sign-in sheet, as I mentioned, that is a joint sign-in sheet for all of the groups that are represented here tonight. The organizations that we have represented are Montana Conservation Voters, the Montana Environmental Information Center, Northern Plains Resource Council, and Honor the Earth. Next, I would like to introduce our panelists that we're going to be hearing from tonight. And I've had assurances from all of them that they did not use ChatGPT to write their presentations. First up, we're going to hear from Ann Hedges with the Montana Environmental Information Center. MEIC's Executive Director, Ann Hedges, began working at MEIC in 1993 and has worked towards a clean and healthful environment for present and future generations ever since. Her focus is on air pollution, climate, energy, and the public's right to know and participate has resulted in numerous campaign and legislative victories that have protected public health and natural resources for generations to come. Next up, we're going to have Crystal Two-Bowls from Honor the Earth. Crystal is an Oglala Lakota and Northern Cheyenne grassroots organizer with experience on the front lines during campaign development and management around social, racial, and environmental justice. Crystal's identity as a Native American veteran is central to her organizing and storytelling. At the heart of Crystal's work is sovereignty, land-back, cross-movement relationship building, and a deep commitment to her people. In healing from her experiences as a veteran, Crystal has dedicated herself to embodying what she views as the essential quality of a warrior, what she views as the essential quality of a warrior, a commitment to the well-being of not only her people and their relationship to the land, but that of all peoples. We're going to also be hearing from Kevin Chandler tonight. Kevin Chandler graduated with a BA in chemistry and teaching certification in biology, chemistry, and math from the University of Montana in 1989. Kevin taught science and math at Absaroka High School for 18 years. He earned a Master's of Education in Environmental Sciences from Montana State University, Billings in 2001. Kevin completed a Master's of Geosciences, Hydrology, and Hydrology at Montana Tech in 2009. He worked as a hydrologist with the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology from 2009 to 2021. primarily conducting regional groundwater assessments and groundwater flow modeling. His areas of study include the Madison Aquifer in central Montana, the bedrock aquifers of Stillwater County, the West Billings Aquifer, the Fox Hills and Clear Lake and West Crane Sydney aquifers in northeast Montana. Kevin is currently retired and ranches near Absaroka, Montana. And finally, we have Carrie Olson. Carrie grew up in Laurel, Montana, and now calls Broadview home. She has been married for 9 years to Eric Olson, also of Laurel, and together they are raising their daughter, Lennon, who already shows serious promise on the volleyball court. Carrie brings 22 years of experience working across the country in various roles, advocating for everyday Americans. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you to our panelists. You're going to hear from Ann first, and I promise she is a way more compelling speaker than I am. So,
the pressure's on. Hi, I'm Ann Hedges, and thank you all so much for being here. I hope you learned something. We have been pulling these events together in various communities across the state. We are here because we don't know all the answers, but we do have a lot of questions. And we think that those questions need to be answered, and we need transparency as this industry moves forward. So we're going to tell you what we know. We're going to answer questions. And I can trust you, there are so many resources on our website that we are willing to share with you. And we are happy to have a discussion after this meeting, because obviously we can't during this meeting. But we promise to get to as many questions tonight as we possibly can. So what is an AI data center? Data centers have been around for decades. They are not something new. Data centers have been in our communities for years and years and years. But what we're seeing now is a whole new generation of data centers. And they're coming about because the NVIDIA chip, because chip manufacturing has improved so much that you have chips that are able to run these computers that can create things like generative AI. And these new chips, they are resulting in a race, an AI race, that is very consumptive. It has a lot of value. I am not saying that AI does not have value. I don't think anybody up here is going to tell you that. AI has some value. Generative AI, where you put your face on a horse, that has less value, but it still uses a whole lot of electricity and a whole lot of water. It still can be disruptive for community members who have to live nearby. So what we would like to make sure that the state of Montana puts in regulations that put sideboards on data centers to make sure that they are coming to this state on our terms, that they are not disruptive of senior water right holders, that they are not raising our energy rates for all the rest of us, because we've already seen skyrocketing electricity rates. And we're making sure that they're not disruptive for communities. And there are ways to do all of those things. We just have to make sure that we do it before they get here. So that's a really simplistic version of an AI data center, but that's where we're going to leave it at the moment. Data centers, their energy demand. This is just an article that really sums up the problem. Energy demand from data centers growing faster than the West can supply. And that is the truth. What we've seen already across the country is, first off, a report came out about a year ago from Harvard. And it started addressing some of the concerns with the energy use of data centers and how the energy use is being subsidized by existing ratepayers. So the problem we have is these data centers come in and they get below-cost deals for their power. And somebody has to cover the cost. Somebody has to cover the cost for the transmission system, the distribution lines, the pipelines, the roads, the power plants to feed these data centers. Somebody's got to pay. And what we're seeing across the country, and what this report from Harvard pointed out, is a lot of times these data centers are relying on existing customers to subsidize their true value. And there's a way to prevent that from happening. We think that should happen. because we are already in this country seeing an enormous increase in electricity rates. So what you're seeing in this chart on the right just came out from the Yale Climate Connections. And what it shows you is that there's really three classifications of ratepayers. There's our residences, that's most of us. There's your small commercial, or your commercial, that's usually data centers. And then there's your major industrial, your refineries, your cement kilns, your power plants. I guess power plants don't need it. But they're the industrial customers. There's the big boys. And until about 2007, all three of these, their rates changed at about the same pace. But you see beginning in 2007 that there's a differentiation. You start seeing that industrial users are paying less for their energy use per kilowatt hour versus residential customers. And then in 2021, residential customers across the nation, this is nationwide, our rates started increasing rapidly, relatively speaking. This is Montana. This is NorthWestern Energy's electricity rates. Now, I'm not talking about co-ops, and I think co-ops in the most recent magazine had a good, really breakdown from 3 co-op managers about their concerns about data centers, the value of data centers, as well as their concerns about who regulates them. When I read that, I walked away saying, I don't know who regulates them, because each manager seemed to have a different opinion about who was in charge of regulating the data center, who was in charge of the local government. Sometimes yes. Was it the state? Which agency? I think we need to be asking these questions. Who is in charge? But in NorthWestern area service territory, you can see residential customer, their use per person has remained fairly flat. That's the green line at the bottom. At the same time, the cost of our electricity has risen dramatically. And anybody who pays their power bill knows that that's true. Our residential electricity rates have already been rising significantly. Can we afford to subsidize some of the richest companies in the world? No. We already are paying far too much for our electricity, as this chart shows. And then this just shows that NorthWestern rates over time, how they have varied. The decisions the Public Service Commission, who is in charge of customer rates, the decisions they've made, sorry, I need some water, to increase our rates, just like they are doing right now. And what you can see is that since 2022, residential customer rates have risen 39.4% since 2022. So if you are concerned about your energy rates and you're thinking, God, how come my power bill is so high? It's because these are decisions that the Public Service Commission is making at the request of NorthWestern Energy. That's now. Let's talk about what happens when this occurs. The top line is the energy use of Montana customers in NorthWestern Energy service territory. On average, they're providing 760 average megawatts of power to existing Montana customers. What you can see on the bottom line is what happens when all the data centers that have been announced get built. I want you to think about what that energy use does to this state. That is a dramatic increase. And we know, based on the World Generating Station, power plants are not cheap. Power plants are very expensive. And so if existing customers who don't need this extra power are forced to pay for the power or subsidize it in any way, shape, or form, for all of these data centers, we're going to be broke. We are going to drive businesses out of this state because we've already had one business where they closed part of its operations in view, REC Silicon, because they pointed the finger at high power costs. So what happens when all these data centers come in and they're asking our utility to feed them power? What's happening across the country is existing customers are helping to subsidize that cost of power. And that's what we don't want to have happen. Microsoft just put something out today, I believe it was. It's basically a Bill of Rights for data centers. And the first thing they said is existing customers should not be subsidizing data centers. And that is a job of the Utility Commission. That is a job of our elected officials. Because if we serve all this power, we're in trouble. So there's a question here too. Is this real? Or is it Memorex? That's for the old people in the room. So, is this real? And what you're seeing from a lot of the biggest CEOs in the nation and the Wall Street Journal is not necessarily. So what happens when these data centers come here and they say, we need all this electricity, we need all this transmission, and we need this, and we need that, and you guys should pay for it. And oh, by the way, we've already decreased your property tax rates for data centers. In 2017, we started decreasing property tax rates for data centers, and we expanded that property tax rate to all associated infrastructure and generation facilities for data centers. 0.9% is what data centers, their generation facilities, and their infrastructure pay. That's broadband, that's everything. So these guys are not going to necessarily be paying their fair share of our property taxes. And then what happens when in 5 or 6 years the chips are obsolete, because that's about how long these really high-tech chips last. Think about a computer. How long does your computer last? When they have to turn them over, are they going to stay here? And if they pick up and they leave, we, as existing customers, are going to be stuck still paying for that infrastructure. We are still on the hook to pay for their power plants that we didn't need in the first place. There are ways to fix this problem. We need to do it before they start building these power plants and they hook into the grid, and somehow or another we get roped into picking up the tab if they hightail it, like the data center down at the Hardin Generating Station did. It hightailed it down to Texas after a few years. We can't have that happen and be on the hook for paying the tab. There's ways to fix that. So China, they overbuilt their AI data centers, and you have a lot of buildings that are empty now because they buy into the hype that we are being pitched right now that this is a game changer. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Some of the tech people like IBM said it's not possible. There are not enough chips in the world to feed the U.S. data center hype right now. Not even close. So a lot of this data center stuff is hype. And these guys are shopping around between states. They're looking for the best deal. Like the one in Great Falls, it just said we're not going to locate in Great Falls after all. We're going to go, I think it was to Michigan, Minnesota, one of those two. Because they're getting a better deal. They have more operations there. These guys are shopping around. They are businessmen. That's what they are. There's nothing wrong with that. But we shouldn't be. We shouldn't succumb to their marketing schemes and start saying, oh yeah, come here. We'll pay your way. That's what we should not do. So data centers, growth and challenges, I've covered some of this. But, I just want to point out the jobs issue. There are jobs building data centers. There are. We know that. There's electric jobs, there's plumbing jobs, there's construction jobs. That's great. They're temporary jobs. They often bring people in. We want workers here, but then when their construction is done, there aren't that many jobs. What's left are jobs that aren't on site. So there's some jobs on site, but lots of jobs at data centers, they're working from 100 miles away. So it's not like those people are contributing to the schools. So think about, we talk about jobs. Construction jobs are great. Electricians, we love electricians, thank God for them. But they're not people who necessarily stick around. Those jobs are temporary. Their record, data centers have rightly earned a dismal reputation for creating the lowest number of jobs per square foot in their facilities, said a chief executive of data center operations at Patmos Hosting. I'm not saying it, he said it. So what is the legislature done? Who's in charge of all this anyway, right? Who's in charge? Well, it's our elected officials. Thank you, elected officials, for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. I work in the halls of the Capitol and have for 20-some years, 32 years, sorry. And they work really hard. And they don't have the opportunity to know all the things that come before them. And I'm happy that they're here tonight learning. Because what they've done is they have been, I think, snookered on the data center industry in 2017 to give them a property tax rate that at that time was lower than residential property tax rates. Okay? They just fixed that this last session. But this session they expanded that property tax rate. So we tried to pass some decent bills this session on data centers, and they all failed. So This does my heart good because I'm hoping that all of you can talk to your elected officials how you want your electricity bills to be insulated from the impacts of data centers. So the legislature absolutely has a role, but nobody has a bigger role than the Montana Public Service Commission. Nobody. They are the ones who establish rates for our utilities. They are the ones who determine how much residential customers like us have to pay for power. They are the ones in charge of deciding whether NorthWestern Energy can start serving these large loads in a way that does not impact existing customers. That's their duty. That's the law. The question is, are they going to fulfill their duty and are they going to comply with the law? And that is dependent on all of us speaking up and asking them to put protections in place that other states already have. We are not asking for the moon here. We are asking our state elected officials to do what a lot of places in this country have already done, is protect existing customers, because we already have faced unaffordable electricity rates. So we petitioned the Montana Public Service Commission in November, asking them to establish some safeguards for existing customers. The Montana PSC still has not acted on our request. It is not a hard thing for it to do. It needs to do it. Otherwise, these data centers are going to come in, and it's going to be too late. But what's the problem with all this? There's no transparency. This was just filed by NorthWestern Energy at the Montana Public Service Commission, and about the only thing that's not redacted about these agreements with these data centers between NorthWestern and these data centers is the language that says this is confidential. Just about everything has been redacted, which means you don't know what the agreement is with the utility. We don't know what it is. You know, who's analyzing this? Who gets to kick the tires on this and make sure that we are not subsidizing data centers? It is up to the Utility Commission to do that. We need them to do that, and this should be unacceptable. I just want to point out, I think this is my last slide, that there is a data center. It's a crypto operation in Butte. And you have REC Silicon, and you have, which is a manufacturer down there, Atlas Power, that's the data center. The orange are the numbers for your data center. And you can see REC Silicon. Those are the taxes they pay, the local taxes, every single year, the number of employees, and then the energy use. And I think that is a great indicator of what type of business this is and how we need to be careful that we are not falling into a trap. That these guys come, they make us promises that they're not going to hurt our rates, and then the next thing you know, they're taking all of our electricity and making an unreliable electric system that costs us a whole lot more money. So we have tools, we have the means. This is a hurdle that we can absolutely overcome. We just have to do it. And now I'm going to pass it off onto our water specialist. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kevin Chandler. I just found out that I was going to be speaking yesterday. My former boss, John Wrighton, had an issue come up and couldn't be here. John did a study of Broadview area and was going to use that as an example of the situation we have in Montana with a lot of areas with trying to find water, especially if anybody wants to have development. And so here's Broadview here, and so I'll be talking a lot about. I looked at the nine townships around Broadview to look at what water's available. So there's some great land out there that could be used for industrial purposes or housing for bedroom community for Billings. But when it comes to the water, there's, like a lot of areas in Montana, serious issues. Okay, so this is just real quickly the geologic map of that area. And you can see all these different colors are different formations, and then these black lines are all faults. And so instead of being layer cake where you might have a bunch of water in a certain layer, it's all chopped up and faulted and thrusted and moved around. And that makes finding water there very difficult. most of these formations shown here are not aquifer formations. They're clays and shales. It's the same thing I've studied the West Billings area. If you don't have a well in the gravels in West Billings and you want to drill deeper, you got to drill thousands of feet to get below the shale. Okay, and so West Billings is a story of a little package of gravel with the water in there that comes from irrigation. The irrigation goes away, the water goes away. Okay, and we're building houses all over that, and I studied that and did modeling of that. But you can't, if you drill deeper there, you don't get anything because it's just shale. And this is the reason why if you go on the other side of the river, there's not very many houses because you have miles and miles of shale, no groundwater. Okay, and so anytime we look at any development in Montana, we should be thinking about where's the water going to come from for that development. Okay, so here's a slide from John's report and showing some of the different formations. We have the Tongue River and the Lebo. This is the tertiary formations. You get down into the Hell Creek and the Fox Hills and the Bear Paw Shale. Now we're into Cretaceous stuff. And you can see those are fair aquifers, meaning that the water quality is not very good and there's not much water. The best example would be in the Judith River. This is that sandstone. If you're driving out by Park City, you see that huge layer of sandstone in there. And some of the cliffs around here are Judith River. And then the Eagle Formation is probably the best place to find water in around here, and that's the rim rocks. So if you're down here below it, you're not going to get water out of that that's up there, right? So anyway, so this is, and then if you really want to get deep, you can go down into the Prior Conglomerate. There's some ideas of going to the Madison Aquifer, which is limestone. That makes the Palisades at Red Lodge along the Beartooth Front. There's water that goes down underneath us. It's thousands of feet deep here. At one time, the golf course drilled a deep well down in there, thinking that they might irrigate out of that. The water's warm and it kills the grass. Okay, so not a good place for that. Okay. So if we're going to look up in the Broadview area for water and we're drilling wells, I just went in there and looked at those townships and pulled up 381 wells, and you can see most of them fall in that 5 to 10 gallons a minute. Well, if you need thousands of gallons a minute, where are you going to get that? Okay. And the other thing about this data, there are some few big producers out there, but they're kind of rare. Is that this doesn't include all the dry holes. So if we could include all the dry holes, we'd really shift and skew this data. That's not included. This is from Montana Bureau of Mines GWIC, Groundwater Information Center. Great place to go look at this stuff. And not only that, the other thing is that you can see most of the wells are under 250 feet. And so nobody's going deeper to find deeper water there because it's not there. It's not usable conditions for that water. So where are you going to get the water? And the other thing I think for a lot of these industrial purposes, they want pretty good quality water because if the water corrodes the cooling system too much, it doesn't work very well. And so this is just looking at the different aquifers we might find in the Broadview area and give you an idea of, let me go back here. This is specific conductance, a measurement of the amount of dissolved solids in the water. And to give you an idea, the Yellowstone River is about 280. Okay, so that falls down here. I kind of hit these in here. So good's down under 1,000. Okay, there's water up in the Broadview area that's in the 20, 30, 40,000. Okay, so you can see that most of the wells drilled up there fall into the fair to poor to very poor, and the water's not good for much, and that's part of the reason why there's not a lot of houses up there and there's not a lot of development up there, right? And John's study was trying to find a better water source for the Broadview area up there. Okay, and after looking at hundreds of wells up there, he found a few areas that have the Eagle Sandstone that might have a good water source for Broadview. And you can see they're quite a few miles away from Broadview. Right? And then, again, there's not very many big producer wells in there. And so you can be guaranteed the farmers and ranchers in these areas that have decent water don't want to part with that. Okay? So my talk is really short and sweet here. Most of the wells are low yields, less than 20 gallons a minute. Most of the wells are less than 300 feet deep. Complex geology makes it difficult to predict where you're going to find a good well. Poor water quality is common, and that's common for a lot of areas, especially if you get out further in eastern Montana. And the sodium sulfate-rich water will kill vegetation and produces health problems for humans and livestock. Okay? The sulfate is a great laxative, so you can have really crappy water.
Waiting all night to use that word.
Yeah. I guess my point here is that, if you're going to have any development, whether it's housing development, industrial development, we need to consider the water, and then we need to consider what the value of the water is to the existing water rights holders. And I think with a lot of development that's being promoted in Montana, that's not being considered. That's what got me into groundwater was having my ranch water threatened by subdivision. So that's what got me out of teaching into groundwater. So, and it doesn't matter what type of development is. We're supposedly first in time, first in right, and hang on to that when you go to defend your water rights. So.
Okay, really quick announcement. Everyone should have gotten note cards. So if you have a note card and you have questions that you would like us to try to get to while we're here, go ahead and write your question down on that note card, and one of our folks will come up and grab that from you. Maybe just wave it at them. I think there's a few, Shannon. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the impacts on rural Montana and Indian country. I know we have some folks in the room that traveled up here. Really thankful for that. But I'm going to talk about the health, the social, environmental, and cultural impacts that these hyperscale data centers bring, and including generative AI. And so just looking at the environment alone, we're looking at sound pollution from these hyperscale data centers. So for reference, they can go up to 75 or 97 decibels. That's like having a lawnmower constantly going 24 hours a day, all year. That's what's happening. And so in comparison, we're looking at an LRAD. So folks aren't aware. An LRAD is a long-range acoustic device. It's used to it's like a sound cannon, and it can burst your eardrums. That's at 140 decibels. That's not a big difference there. And also, just to say, 85 decibels is the harm threshold to a human being. So you're already past that threshold. And yes, there are some things that can be done that can help muffle that and address that. Sure. And also that costs them more money to do that, right? So just adding that in there, the light pollution as well. You're looking at floodlights being on 24 hours a day for these, for security. And we're known as Big Sky Country, so we can probably say goodbye to Big Sky Country in those areas that have those floodlights, right? There's going to be sound pollution and light pollution. There's air pollution, so we're looking at the fine particulate matter. And this is a statistic. If folks picked up fact sheets, there's a myth and fact sheet that's out there. All of this is on there. There's sources and citations, so you can find that on there as well. But this fact is by 2030, 2.5 billion tons of CO2 may be released into the atmosphere by hyperscale data centers. One center alone can release anywhere between 200,000 to 400,000 metric tons of CO2 annually. And so we will be exposed to that, breathing that in. I'll speak on the health issues on the next slide that causes. Water contamination. We're looking at potentially PFAS chemicals being introduced into the water during the cooling process. As we know, PFAS are forever chemicals. They do not go away. We're also tracking that there is closed-loop systems. So everything that I've seen so far around closed loop systems is that some of these hyperscale data centers are so massive that actually they're not going to be able to use that closed loop system in the amounts of water that they're currently saying. It's going to be much more than that. We're also looking at the common sense that water evaporates, and so chemicals are going to be left after that evaporation occurs. More water is going to be pulled in, right? If there is evaporation and there's chemicals left, where does that go? Where is it getting discharged into? Currently in Oklahoma, they've passed legislation in some counties that allow for them to put that discharge into creeks and rivers and streams. So that's not here yet, but we're definitely tracking that that's happening in other places and other locations. There's 1 billion, so based on the Anthem project in Oklahoma currently, they're projecting about 1 billion gallons of water per year will be used for cooling the hyperscale data center. And that's one that exists, it's there, right? And so it's just a reference point. And so it's not to say that's going to be the number for every single hyperscale data center that's out there, but it is a good reference point for one that already currently exists, right? And that we're tracking numbers for. Economic impacts, you heard Anne present all of those, so just kind of going over that again. We're looking at the increased electricity bills. We're looking at power outages. And so if folks are tracking, everyone knows that the electricity system in the United States is really outdated, right? We know that especially in rural Montana, it's extremely outdated. You go to reservations, even more outdated, right? So what you're looking at is rolling outages that could potentially happen from the stress that comes from putting that much into the grid, right, and on these systems. So that is concerning, but what we're also looking at and what we've heard in places like Georgia, Virginia, Tennessee, is that they actually are running into fires. So homes that don't have up-to-date electrical systems there, they're vulnerable and they have weaknesses and they can start houses on fire. And that's a reality as well, and there's already a couple examples of those happening. And so when you look at communities in rural Montana and you look at our electricity system in our homes, that's something that we're going to look at. Not to say it will happen, saying that it has happened in other places and we've seen that. The economic benefits, I think that's the biggest selling point for these data centers. I know especially with a lot of my organizing and work in Indian country is like that's the big selling point. It's like, yes, we need economic development in our communities desperately, right? And especially rural Montana, we do need that. And also, this economic benefit is very limited and very short term. Anne mentioned that the jobs, a lot of them are like not going to be here locally. The numbers that we're seeing are that for one data center, they started out about 1,500 jobs for folks, primarily around construction, all of the different industries around that. And then once it was live and actually running, it dropped down to about 100 to 150 jobs. In those jobs, I don't know if folks are familiar with the coal industry in turnover, where people from out of state that hold certain positions come into our communities. They do their job, they do the maintenances, they do all that, then they leave, right? That's what a lot of those jobs on the data centers are going to be. They are not going to stay in our communities. And there are some jobs that are connected to like security and things like that that will probably stay, but it's nowhere near the economic benefit that they're projecting and that they're pushing out to our communities. Then looking at NDAs, the biggest thing here, and Anne already mentioned it, is transparency, but also just looking at the fact that there's no accountability. We elect officials to represent us and our voices, right? But what NDAs do is they take away that accountability from the people, right? So we have elected officials who sign these NDAs, and they can no longer give me information or any of you information about what they're doing. And so how are they supposed to represent us, right? And so just naming that transparency and the lack of accountability is so important. And that also comes with manufactured consent. So we're also looking at what I call social bribery, where they're going to buy playgrounds for us, they're going to pay for new basketball courts for us, they're going to do all the nice things, right, to buy our consent. But how long are they going to stay? And then are they going to leave us with the bill after they leave, right? Next one, how many people hunt in here? I'm sure we have a lot of hunters, right? So we're going to look at these hyperscale data centers in the areas. It's called electromagnetic frequencies are going to scare these animals away. They don't like these things like the high sound pollution or the light pollution or all of those things, right? So it's definitely going to impact that. And for Montanans, that's a big thing. language revitalization. So for Native communities, one of the big things that people are pushing right now is that because we have language loss, they think that generative AI is going to be able to help us relearn our languages and teach us that. But for folks that understand AI and then generative AI, is that you have to feed data into that system, right? There will actually probably never be a point where 500 plus different unique languages in the United States alone gets uploaded into the cloud enough for us to be able to teach ourselves our language again. It just doesn't exist. That's not going to happen. And so a lot of false narratives are coming out of this, especially for targeted communities like Native communities. Generative AI, so for us at Honor the Earth, there's a bit of a difference. So like Anne said, we're not outright opposed to all AI, right? AI has a lot of benefits. There's a lot of ways that it's used for folks with disabilities. There's a lot of ways it can process and analyze data. That's really beneficial for our communities, right? But there's generative AI. And there's actually no real necessary use for generative AI that already exists. So it's actually important to understand who is telling us that this is so important. Probably foreign corporations that are trying to make money off of us, right? And so looking at the fact that they are targeting poor, rural, and low-income schools to become what they call sandboxes. These sandboxes are basically turning our children into guinea pigs for the impacts of generative AI. But what we're seeing is that generative AI actually impacts our cognitive ability, and so it creates cognitive decline, where our children are now, and this is based on a report from teachers and academics all the way from kindergarten up to university level, but it's creating a situation where our children can no longer critically think for themselves, and they are not prepared to go into these schools. And that's a big thing. The other thing that it's doing, jumping over to the health impacts, is that there's already cases of our young people and even adults using generative AI as a companion for mental health and to support them, right? And there's cases of generative AI telling these young people to kill themselves and even going as far as giving them the roadmap how to do it. And they did. So there are parents out there that are currently suing these different corporations for the impacts of generative AI that will be powered by hyperscale data centers, right? There's also instances of murders happening where a grown male adult actually murdered his parents because generative AI, a chatbot, told him to. And so those things are already out there. There's already instances of this, and there's no real need for generative AI. Just naming two, the two largest industries in Montana are agriculture and tourism. How are hyperscale data centers going to impact those? Critical minerals. So just connecting the dots to some of the things, there's hyperscale data centers, right, and the impacts of those. But there's also the energy and the electricity needed to power them. There's also the critical minerals that are needed to create the components and the GPUs that go into the servers, that go into everything from the air conditioning units down to the smallest pieces, right? And so this is just a list in one graphic of many that exist that lays out some of the different critical minerals that are needed. For Indian country and for folks on native reservations and rural communities, most of these critical minerals will come from our lands. And so really looking at who's being targeted, and I'm betting to say that a lot of it is in rural communities as well, which Montana has a lot of. Looking at just continued powering these hyperscale data centers, currently there's obviously coal, there's frac gas, there's wind, there's solar. As backup, they use diesel generators to continue to power them if they go down. But the big concern for us and myself, I live in Colstrip, is nuclear. And so presenting small modular reactors, which is a technology that doesn't exist outside of a power plant. Supposedly, there's a small modular reactor in Russia and one in China. But if I was Russia and China, I would probably tell the US that I had one too. There's no physical evidence, there's no visual, there's no nothing that confirms their existence. Inside the United States, we actually sent someone to tour the National Nuclear Laboratories in Idaho, and they told us that there's a small modular reactor there. There's not. We physically went there and visually looked. There's no small modular reactor. From what we know, they only exist there in PowerPoints. And so they're known as PowerPoint small modular reactors. So going into national trends, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just wanted to point out that right now we're seeing the rollback of so many protections that we've had to be able to protect our communities, our families, our land, our ability to hunt, all of that. These are all the executive orders as of a month ago. So there's more executive orders currently that are actively just paving the way for these hyperscale data centers to just come in, right? And so these are some of them, and then these are some of the other protections that are also being rolled back that prevent us as citizens in our different communities from actually protecting our homes and our people, our lands, all of it. Oh. Okay, last one. The path forward, so just saying that this isn't inevitable. Everywhere I go, I run into that language of saying, oh, it's going to happen anyways. We just need to get on board. Or it's inevitable. It's not inevitable. And actually, it's a trend right now for these data centers to be stopped. And so as of right now, there's 25 data centers that were completely canceled. This doesn't count the number of data centers that just stopped in one city and moved to a different one, right? So 25 data centers have been stopped across the United States in some of the states that are listed out there. But also we have national and international trends of these large international corporations backing out of hyperscale data centers and generative AI because they know what's coming. They know that there's pushback, and they know that at some point, generative AI is not going to be the answer, right? And they're already tracking these trends, and they're already ahead of us by years. So the path forward really quickly is Montanans can't be the ones that pay the price for this, right? Especially rural Montanans. And so just naming that anything that comes in our communities need to be locally controlled and driven. We have to have transparency, and that can't be negotiable. We need to make sure that tax breaks and incentives are also, for these corporations, are also non-negotiable, and that we don't end up paying for them in the long run, right? And then on the right is just a few things that I have seen actively in terms of people organizing and that have proven to be successful in stopping data centers. So it's not inevitable, and Montana should not be the ones that pay the price. Thank you.